So when I see people either dressed, for example, in Jewish Orthodox dress, or the Orthodox or conservative dress of other religions, you get in conversation, but I think the message for most of the public is, this is just not for me. I think that's the overwhelming message for most people. Sure, there are people that want to talk, but people like world culture. People, Americans, millions of Americans go on vacation to China, to Vietnam, to Polynesia. People enjoy learning about foreign cultures. But what we're finding is that you could say that, that interest, that interest in world cultures and foreign traditions which people have does not translate into a successful Hare Krishna movement. Because we always hear stories about people that come up to devotees dressed in that way, saying, hey, where you guys been, etc., etc., but somehow or other the movement never grows. So, you can't build a spiritual society based on anecdotes. Anecdotes are nice, but we have to look at what's really happening on the ground. What's happening on the ground is I feel that when we dress in these very, exotic and at least for Americans this exotic way, sure, like I said, Americans love to travel around the world and see foreign cultures. So two things happen, I believe, when you dress like that. Number one, people, at least cultured people, they're interested. And number two, the public in general kind of puts you in a compartment where, okay, you are outside of our culture. We respect you. We respect your right to do what you're doing. It's interesting because it's a foreign culture, but you're not, it's not something that mainstream culture is ever going to do. And that seems, so I think we need a little sociology here. We need a little historical insight. That the anecdotes, and we all know it, where people come up to you and say, hey, what are you doing? For example, I was in an airport one time, coming back from, from Mexico. And in the airport, there was this group, obviously some kind of religious group. They were all dressed in white, like white pants, white shirts. And it was like this religious community, all dressed in white. So I was curious. I kind of wanted to go up to them and say, hey, what are you guys doing? What's this about? Not because I had any interest in joining them, because I had none. It was just, it's curious, it's interesting. Hey, what are you guys doing? And of course, once I go up and talk to them, they're going to say, yeah, we believe this, we believe that. And I, trying to be a gentleman, and say, hey, well, that's interesting, well, good luck. And, so I think it's a mistake to take those casual encounters, chiefly motivated by curiosity, as to mistake that for some kind of deep penetration into the society, or to mistake that for some serious interest by the public in general. Because you see, when someone comes up to us in an airport or here or there in a market and says, hey, what are you guys doing? What's this all about? The story you don't tell, because it's the story you don't know about, is the other 50 people in that departure lounge that think you're strange. According to universally accepted good manners in this country, unless you run into some like crazy freak that doesn't have good manners, but it's universally accepted that if someone is obviously from a foreign culture, especially a foreign religious culture, you just mind your own business, you don't bother them. So that story, of all the people that think it's strange, you're not going to tell that story because you don't know about it, because they don't come up to you. And so I think what we're doing is satisfying the curiosity of a few people and convincing the nation in general that we are really not part of mainstream society and we're just out there. That's what I think is happening in terms of, by historical analysis, by looking at the results, social psychology. I believe that's what's happening. Yes?
Outside of clothing, what are their strategies to
the strategy is that we should do everything to make Western people feel comfortable, whether it's music, whether it's clothing, whether it's food, whether it's architecture. Prabhupada taught us that. When Prabhupada bought the first real ISKCON property in Watsika Avenue in Los Angeles, it had been a Methodist church. It had typical Methodist church architecture. The devotees wanted to change it, to put on a Hindu-Indian facade. Prabhupada said, no, I want it to be like an American church. The devotees were about to rip out the pews in the sanctuary and put the deities in, because that was, the magnificent sanctuary room. Prabhupada said no. He insisted on installing the Radha Krishna deities in the social hall, which he converted to a temple, which was a room half the size and less than half the opulence of the sanctuary. Why? He wanted Americans to come sit down on pews in a familiar atmosphere, keep their shoes on, and learn about Krishna. And that's why Prabhupada, when he gave his Sunday lectures in LA, and many times I attended, he did not give the Sunday lecture in front of the deities. He gave it in the sanctuary where Americans could come and feel comfortable. So you have this bizarre phenomenon where Prabhupada is trying to be more Western, and his Western sort of neophyte disciples are trying to be more Indian. As they say, ships passing in the night. So it's not just about dress, it's about a whole attitude. It's about respecting the people you're trying to preach to. You cannot simultaneously denigrate and attract people. And it is one of the great ISKCON pastimes to denigrate the Western world. So much so that when I began Krishna West, I got all kinds of feedback, from sannyasis and leaders and ordinary devotees, that it was offensive to juxtapose the two words Krishna and West. Because Krishna is the holy of holies and the West is the evil of evils. And these, brilliant thinkers forgot that Prabhupada used the word West in his pranam mantra. So it's a question of, you cannot save the West if you're not even part of the society. We can be inside Western culture as Vaishnavas, as practicing Vaishnavas, as faithful followers of Prabhupada. We can be within society. For example, think of a Catholic bishop. He's part of society. He's not outside society. He's within the society. Think of a rabbi. They're part of society. They're not outside. Well, the Orthodox, that's kind of more Hare Krishna. But if you think of, respected rabbis, priests, they are within society. They're seen as respectable members of society. They're not the exotic other. So that's what we're talking about. Prabhupada wrote me a letter when I first took sannyas. I wrote him and said I was going to preach in the colleges. He said, do not present Krishna consciousness as a bunch of rules. I hear these endless horror stories of someone giving a Sunday feast lecture in ISKCON and talking about the regular principles. Prabhupada said, don't do this. It's not about Hare Krishna. Prabhupada said it's not about rules, it's the most sublime philosophy. Some people who do all kinds of things against what Prabhupada said, but they wear a dhoti and think they're, the most faithful Prabhupada followers. Prabhupada says in his purport to the Bhagavatam 4.854, make all adjustments, take all the risks, take all risks, so that people in the Western countries feel comfortable with Krishna consciousness. All adjustments, all risks. Tamal H.D.Goswami, one of his many glorious achievements, he went to China. And, now we have thousands and thousands of Chinese devotees. Now, Tamal Krishna, with Prabhupada's full blessings, cut off his sika, let his hair grow a little bit, put on Western clothes, because there were legal barriers in China. And yet, one can easily prove that cultural barriers are much more difficult than legal barriers. France. Look at France and China. Let's engage in a process called thinking. In China, there are serious legal barriers, but not serious cultural barriers, and therefore there are thousands of Chinese devotees. In France, no legal barriers, serious cultural barriers, and the number of devotees, in ISKCON, you can probably count on two hands. In a country with 65 million people. It's frankly a disaster. I was there last year for some time. I traveled. It's bad. It's bad. And that's no legal barrier, but very serious cultural barriers. So if we want to be rational, if legal barriers justified in Prabhupada's mind making all kinds of adjustments and it worked, what to speak of a situation where the barriers are much more difficult? In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna uses the term bhakti yoga, but he also uses the term buddhi yoga. It means the spiritual path of being a rational, intelligent human being. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does not try to manipulate Arjuna into involuntary liberation by a Gyata Sukriti. Here, Arjuna, eat this. What is it, Krishna? Never mind, just eat it. What we find in Bhagavad Gita is Krishna persuading Arjuna, giving rational arguments. He calls the whole process buddhi yoga. Buddhi means reason, logic, intelligence, discernment. So ISKCON's great Western strategy to sort of a benevolent manipulation by a Gyata Sukriti, where the sound goes in their ear. They don't know what it is. They don't want to be devotees. They don't accept Krishna as the name of God, but the sound went in their ear. Got them. It's like all these, endless gotcha moments of a Gyata Sukriti. As if people could be against their will, without their will, just kind of manipulated into becoming Vaishnavas. Which Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, 1728, doesn't work, by the way, 1728. Any religious activity performed without really believing in what you're doing, very little effect in this life or the next. This life or the next. That's Krishna. Rupa Goswami says in Upadeshamrita, you think the results of devotional practice are automatic, that destroys devotion. So people don't automatically become devotees. People don't unconsciously become devotees, involuntarily become devotees. The whole Bhagavad Gita is to try to persuade Arjuna rationally, intelligently, to accept Krishna. And that's what we should be doing instead of this failed policy, to be perfectly honest, of thinking we can manipulate people with, divine manipulation against their will, against their awareness, manipulate them so that they become devotees by Gyata Sukriti. This policy has been tried for almost half a century. It just doesn't work. And what we find is that when we respect the public by adopting some of their benign customs. I'm wearing right now a shirt and pants. I don't see any fruits pouring out of these clothes right now. It's not that when I put on these clothes, I suddenly become greedy and lusty and want the fruits of my actions. This is not fruitive clothes. This is not karmi clothes. For God's sake, it's just a bunch of cotton. And it covers my body. I'm decent. I'm covered. It's comfortable. What in God's name is fruitive about these clothes if I'm serving Krishna? So if we could just tone down the superstition and the irrationality and actually become a rational spiritual science, we'd actually be successful. I was in Chapel Hill a couple of months ago. We had a whole room full of very intelligent students. There are two tops, one of the top public and one of the top private schools were there. University of North Carolina and Duke. We had a whole room full of people. They were intelligent. I was actually kind of startled by their questions. I thought, I didn't know there were still intelligent people in this country. I thought everyone was just like texting. But they really asked intelligent questions, and they stayed almost 6 hours. And they chanted Hare Krishna. Because they felt comfortable with us. You want to be respected in this country? Show respect. Show respect. Show respect for the culture you live in. If in this country there are customs which are consistent with, compatible with Krishna consciousness, like wearing decent Western clothes, like eating, food in the mode of goodness. By the way, I'm not talking about Dallas. I have no idea about Dallas. This is not about Dallas. But what I can say is that in ISKCON in general, a huge amount of bhoga offered to Krishna, according to Krishna, is in the mode of passion. Because Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that food in the mode of goodness prolongs life. It doesn't curtail it, the way a lot of our Mahaprashanam does. It prolongs life and it increases health. Now, if you want, is that what we are? Anyway, so my point is that you want to be respected, respect people. You want people to take you seriously, take them seriously. You want people to care about what you're saying, listen to what they're saying. Don't just treat them as a bunch of stupid karmis who cannot be trusted to make their own decisions, and therefore we have to go out on the street. Who cares what they think of our presentation? Because we are going to manipulate them for their own good. We are going to simply control them by Gyata Sukriti and make them what we want them to be, and it doesn't even matter what they think. Their free will is irrelevant. We will control and manipulate them for their own good. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether they like our presentation or not. It's irrelevant. What the public thinks about us is irrelevant. That attitude, in my view, is arrogant, demeaning to the people we're trying to save. And I think when we start respecting, they will respect us. When we listen to them and we care about what they think, they will care about what we think. That's because even God himself reciprocates. How can you expect the public not to reciprocate? Do you think that we can have such a demeaning attitude toward the public and they don't pick it up? They don't know what we're doing? They can't feel our attitude? Do you really think that? You think they're just all a bunch of fools? They may not know about Krishna, but when it comes to human dealings, they're just as smart as we are. And sometimes much smarter. Yes?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.